bigger kind of uphill battle is just the market in terms of both consumers and installers.
This is unique. I feel like a lot of people are kind of on one side of that conversation or the other.
Because at the end of the day, we just want to see stuff built, and we want a city that's awesome and a city that's livable and affordable for everyone.
All it takes is the exposure of a project to the right person. Welcome back to another installment of Innovative Real Estate. I am your host, Breck Crandall, and this is 3 Squared Inc. Today, we're keeping a short cast of characters because we're going to fill this conversation with interesting facts and blow your Midwestern mind because we're bringing together the powers of Ohio and Michigan. Today we have on the podcast as our guest Zach Miller, who's coming to us from the incredible city of Cleveland. There is a lot happening in the Midwest in these post-industrial towns, and Cleveland and Detroit have a whole lot of parallels, some of which we're going to touch on and unpack today. Zach comes to us as an architect who's also practicing and doing some really cool and interesting stuff down there. But he is also on both sides of the fence because he is part of the planning department for the city of Cleveland as well. So we're going to unpack all of that. But without further ado, Zach, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah. Good morning, Breck. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to discuss everything. Yeah, my name is Zach Miller. I'm an architect here in Cleveland, Ohio. Really, excited about the work that Breck's doing and kind of seeing what we can discuss between both of our cities. And as he said, yeah, working on kind of on both sides here at the city of Cleveland, building and housing department. I'm a plan examiner there, which is an amazing job, kind of an opportunity to see all sorts of work coming, through our city. And then privately, yeah, just try to kind of keep a keen eye out for project opportunities, kind of usually just, small things, residential infill work, surrounding communities in Cleveland, the east side suburbs, as we say here, mostly where I kind of live. But yeah, just excited to talk all things architecture, urbanism development, Rust Belt revitalization, all the fun stuff. So thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Excited to get this perspective because this is unique. I feel like a lot of people are kind of on one side of that conversation or the other, and then kind of develop a mindset as a
Right.
result that kind of I don't know, maybe not the right terminology, but pigeonholes them to a certain perspective of the industry. And I think you're towing a very interesting line. And I know you and I just recently officially met each other, have known a little bit about what each other has been up to. But even in just quick conversations, like we're very much on the same thought process here. So let me preface, like, we know that there is a housing crisis, period, full stop. Like, no surprise. We also know that this has not been a federal priority for, I don't know, since the 50s. Like, not in my lifetime have I ever seen an actual push or a drive for housing. Really, that wasn't, just like money or development, capitalism doing its thing, that could turn a very predictable profit. Other than that, like, I haven't seen a boom, like, especially in Detroit. It has only been the last 3-4 years that we've even started seeing construction cones or let alone a crane on the horizon. It was a big, exciting moment for us. Now it's everyday life, but help me set the stage. So what do you see as the challenges to housing? What do you see as the frustrations? And give me a bit of your mindset on the topic.
Wow. That's a great background and great question. I would say there's a lot of things happening at once. From my standpoint here at the city of Cleveland and just small private projects, I really try to take an approach that assesses the market essentially. And just with cost of materials going up and cost to build and this sort of thing, you have to really look at what makes sense. And at the end of the day, there are incentives and there are tax abatements and there are, grants and whatnot. And those are wonderful. But at the end of the day, people have to assemble team. This is a team effort. There's someone or multiple people that pour the concrete and frame the walls and install the windows and pull the permits and do the drawings like on my end. So it's kind of a multiple people that do multiple things. And I think that's kind of why my approach is we got to look at the market and what pencils, what holds water, what fruits have juice that is worth the squeeze in a way. And here in Cleveland, I guess that has to do with, different neighborhoods. How do we how do we make it easier to build is kind of my MO here at the city is, I think it was the mayor of a different city, not in Ohio, I actually think in Texas, that reformed their permitting process and said we kind of get in our own way a lot. We have a lot of wait times, and that's actually something that we've done, I guess, speaking professionally here at the city of Cleveland. We just had a permitting process overhaul that I was a big part of, which was awesome, and we're still working through it to make it easier to pull permits, make it quicker to pull permits, to make the review processes cleaner and more transparent. And that's been a huge help, I think, for a lot of people. And I guess still trying to improve upon that. It's like, how can we incentivize people and say, you know what, it would be cool to build here, whether you're a builder or developer or you want to own a house here. This is the spot to do it. We have land just like Detroit does the land bank. So there's a lot of resources. And I think the second, I guess, way that I look at it is we're still building essentially the same way, like you mentioned, the 50s. We're kind of still building the same way. It's the same, you know, stud wall, shingle applied, sheathing over top. Like, yes, we have made enhancements, absolutely, in terms of performance and insulation requirements. We have the residential codes and just general building codes that provide higher specifications and higher requirements, but we're essentially still building the same way. So I'm really interested in exploring new avenues. I don't know what the answer is, but just new avenues of, how can we create new ways to build? Are there new methods and materials? Are there new ways to actually build a sense of enclosure, which is what we're after? Can we use existing, not just housing stock, but building stock? Can we take existing typologies like big box stores and strip malls, and can we think of new uses for housing in those that actually are pleasant and not weird? Like, how can we kind of investigate those typologies? So yeah, all sorts of things floating around my mind about this. Absolutely.
See, I knew this was gonna happen. All right, so for our showrunner, the person really coordinating all of these podcasts and allowing this to happen, for over to Nora. See, we didn't name this episode before we recorded this one because I didn't know what we were gonna end up covering because Zach here just like listed out 4 full episodes worth of content. So you will be a recurring guest. You don't get a
I
choice
would
now,
love to.
Zach.
That would be amazing.
So let me just let me go back, and I think the theme here of today is going to be like zooming out so that we can really start to assess the situation, because one of the things that I just pulled out from what you said is like pointing out that the buildings are the product of an army, right? I
Right.
mean, the ownership down to every tradesperson that was working on that project who could drive down the street and be like, I worked on that house. Like, that's
Right.
ownership, right? Like the
Right.
crew that helped me build my home that I am in right now, they're part of a family. They have ownership of that thing, right? Like they woke up, went to work, and completed a building in reality. They have ownership of that. And that is not just the people who pulled wires and made the pipes. Like, that's the people who approved the plans, who reviewed this for conformance with zoning and planning regulations. This is the people who like approved my tax situation so that I could actually support this building long term. It's the people who did the energy analysis on the building. Like,
Right. Exactly.
this process is so much bigger than architecture. And so I've really taken a position as of late where you got to step back. Like, you can give me a house that we ordered off Amazon, and in order to live in that house in the city of Detroit, it's going to cost you about $100,000 to connect to the utilities, to apply
Hmm.
for permits, to get everything situated so that you can have a certificate of occupancy. That's a big piece of this conversation. And so we're not just talking about architecture of buildings. Like, unique construction types, awesome. Obviously, Three Squared's been all about that. That's like the majority of the work that we do is
Hmm.
try to push the envelope and see if there are better ways of doing things. And I'll be the first to admit, like, sometimes no. We've been known for working with shipping containers, and it's fun. There is a cool factor. Um, Undeniable, like in terms of their aesthetic, this modern industrial appeal, like all
Hmm.
very good. Are they a superior building product? In most instances, no. And I have very specific reasons as to why. And we can use them if that's the aesthetic and the end goal of what you're
Right.
doing. But
Hmm.
all of these unique construction types are just, they're not fixing the problem. The problem is so much bigger than just the construction typology. And then there's a lot of people involved in the process. So I kind of want to like just like soft pause there and just like really point
Yeah,
out like we're talking about something that is much bigger than any individual house or builder ready plan situation could ever hope to address.
1,000%, 1,000%.
And so in that mindset, as we talk about like so permitting overhauls, we just talked about what's happening in the city of Detroit, where they're making big pushes for this, but I often think that there's like a miscommunication between the narrative and the reality of situations, like a
Right.
road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of scenario. And so tell me a little bit more about that process. Like, how involved were you? What kind of rules were you isolating and addressing that you think really had an impact on housing being accessible or not?
Sure. Yeah. I think so. As a bit of background, in Cleveland and probably similar to Detroit and all sorts of, Rust Belt and Great Lakes cities, there was a rapid expansion of housing. When industry boomed, houses just were basically thrown up, rapidly, and streets had to develop and buildings were built. And, the permitting, as far as I know historically, was not obviously as robust, if existent at all. So people would just buy land and build, whether that
So
were commercial
it was the
storefronts.
Wild West kind of
It was
thing.
it was essentially the Wild West. It kind of
Okay.
still is in some ways, but I think, and that's basically what gave us our housing stock that we still have, and I'm sure Detroit also still has. So we have this breadth on Cleveland here, and it's the east side and the west side of the Cuyahoga River, probably somewhat similar to Detroit in a way, and other cities.
Hmm.
And they kind of follow this development pattern on both sides of the city, where with the after the Industrial Revolution and as manufacturing really picked up in the early 20th century, there was just a massive need for housing, and so houses were just built, rapidly again from 1900 to like 1940, 1950, and kind of outwards from there. Um, and that's just how we have our housing stock. And I think with the advent of zoning codes to try to regulate that growth, I think when we were growing so rapidly, and with the advent of more strict building codes and permitting processes, there was basically this fallout, this kind of like side effect of that whole process where things slowed down and development became harder. And when you throw in other issues like redlining and perceptions of neighborhoods and obviously urban sprawl, which is another kind of fallout of that, you get the condition that Cleveland and Detroit are in now, which are infill opportunities, vacant lots, old decaying houses, housing stock that's
Hmm.
really not easy to work within. And also, I guess the soft cost, I guess, if you will, side of that and permitting is a permitting process that is super overbuilt and tons of different departments and different silos and whatnot, that are touching different parts of a project and might not coordinate. So that's kind of what we started with in Cleveland. There'd be a project, for example, someone wants to build a house and they're doing the city a service by building a house in let's say an area of Cleveland where there wasn't much demand. So instead of being kind of championed to do that work, they were getting essentially, different points, so touch points throughout the city of you need to do this and you need to comply with this and whatever. And only after they had built the foundation or frame the walls would they then say, oh, you know what, your sidewalk's not compliant. You got to fix that too. And oh, you got to tear down this tree. You got to whatever. So the costs would just keep piling up, and people were like, screw this, I'm out. And then that thus continues the cycle of degrowth and population loss
Well,
in
and that
places like
ripples through
Cleveland.
the contractors and then the
It
ownership. And
all
then
ripples through.
you get a situation in Detroit where like people will build in Highland Park because the rules just don't apply
It's just
right
easier.
over the border, right?
Right.
So it's like a city
It's
within a
just
city
easier.
and they'll build there because like I don't have to deal with the Detroit like BS fees on top of this, right?
That
That's kind
that's
of how they
exactly
feel
right.
about them.
That's exactly right. So that's what we did here. I guess just to get to the juxta your question is can we just rebuild this process where instead of all these different departments kind of weighing in at different times, let's build a whole process that is more cohesive. And that's kind of what our work has been. My work, in collaboration with tons of other amazing people at the city of Cleveland have been, past like two years, and we're still working on it. Just so someone can apply for a project application and take it all the way through, and whatever departments have jurisdiction over decisions being made, whether it's a replacement of one singular window in a single family home or whether it's a new office building in downtown Cleveland, the pertinent departments and review bodies will see it. And there's not going to be any after the fact moments or major project killers, because that's another thing too. There might be one department that's like, this is awesome. Another department says this is not okay. We're not okay with the general massing. So I guess this is where my architecture brain kind of comes in, and I've kind of told the city here, we need to kind of mirror what the applicant or the design team or the design professional are doing. They're looking at zoning, fire codes, Ohio building codes, setback requirements, height restrictions from all the codes. Like, they're looking at all these things. They're looking at the pro forma and the program from their client, and they're kind of painting this picture of what building makes sense on a given site. And the city basically needs to kind of mirror their design exercise, instead of reacting after the fact when they present this like thesis level project of, hey, here's our complete 400-page CD set, give us approval. And then comes the list of 12 pages of why this doesn't work. Let's start from the schematic phases all the way down through, and really, like, kind of hold each other's hand in a way, to build stuff. Because at the end of the day, we just want to see stuff built, and we want a city that's awesome, and a city that's livable and affordable for everyone. So that's kind of been my perception on our whole permitting reform here in Cleveland.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the takeaways from your explanation, and kind of like a totally removed layperson's understanding of this. So what I heard is, like, it starts with an understanding on both sides. Like, from a city perspective, everybody has to be able to say two things here is, like, this is complicated and there's a lot of moving parts here,
Right.
right? And if everybody's goal is, one, to build housing, two, to build safe housing, health, safety, and welfare is like, we
Right.
both
There we
wear
go.
that badge. and then yours, as like a city perspective, is what is that community engagement, and that involves the aesthetic and the use case and the
Right.
occupancy, like all these things, right? But that starts with an understanding, and then that understanding becomes a pathway. And what you've worked with everybody in various departments to do is to at least show a path through the system. And then
Correct.
that leads to communication. And the communication, all it takes is the exposure of a project and its status to the right person, and things will continue to move. Like, I don't think
That's
I've
right.
ever met somebody who works in a permitting or planning department who was like hostile to a building coming into an existence. Like, I don't think they would have that job if this was the
Correct.
case. Okay, so understanding they are not your enemy.
Right.
We are just, a lot of us are following the rules, oh, gross.
Absolutely.
Right, but you're trying to uphold these rules, and sometimes those rules are self-inflicting and, like, step on themselves. Or it was
That's
zoning
exactly right.
regulations set in the 50s, and, like, we couldn't predict what things would be used for in 2026. Like, okay, so understanding leads to a pathway, which gives exposure of where we are in the process to the person who needs to respond to it. And if that happened, like, if when I needed a right-of-way permit to cut open the street in front of my house,
Right.
the sewer people called me. Oh, wouldn't that be lovely?
Right. Yep.
But it's all magic and fairies and unicorns, because that's hard in reality, and I understand that. And, like, what works in Detroit might not work for you guys. Like, our specific problems here, we built a city for 4 million people, and we have less than a million people here, and we're trying, but our
Right.
infrastructure is old and it's stretched thin, and we don't have the tax base to keep it up. And so when we add more to that, who's covering the bills, right? We're already
Correct.
stretched thin. That causes a lot of the tension here in Detroit. And then we've got houses buried on, like, every lot that's vacant, which is like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
here's
they
your
demolish
builder
it.
ready lot that you gotta pay somebody 30K to dig out and fill with fresh dirt. Like,
Right.
okay, so those are
Yeah.
our issues. How do you connect then? So, all right, we've got a pathway, we've got communication. Somebody's coming to you saying, I found an architect. I designed a house that we want to build. I'm coming to the city of Cleveland. How has your process now changed this as an incoming home builder?
That's a great question. And I think, like I said, it's kind of a work in progress too. So we're still seeing some growing pains, I would say, with the process. But I think the goal is someone can come with that and not feel like they have to quarterback their own project, because previously in Cleveland, that's been the Achilles
That's a
heel.
great statement.
Well,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
what it is. It's, they'll come in and say, "Yeah, I want to build a house here," whether they're the end user, the occupant, or they want to build a spec home, and they're like, in city X or whatever elsewhere in Ohio or maybe in Michigan, it's a one person building department, and it's a matter of presenting your plans and getting a sign off, and he says no
And they're
problem.
there every other Thursday
Right,
from
and I'm
3:15.
correct, and they're the inspector as well as well as being the building official. So they're all, they wear many hats, and it's easy
Hmm.
to build there. In a big jurisdiction like Cleveland or Detroit, there's a lot of departments and a lot of people and a lot of codes and regulations to enforce. So it just gets really messy. So the goal is that, yes, people will not feel like they have to quarterback their own house or their own project, and there's going to be like a really easy path rather, through the process where they have total transparency of where things are, and we're all also keeping ourselves accountable because things happen. There's a ton of volume here. If something, gets lost in the weeds, or there's a certain review body that isn't, responding, we all kind of are seeing that and keeping each other, like holding each other accountable to push this thing through. Because at the end of the day, it only hurts us as a city to not push things through. So that's kind of the goal. And I think the goal,
Hmm.
more broadly speaking, is make it cool to build in Cleveland again. I think there's this repertoire here, and because I talk with builders, I talk with developers, I talk with fellow architects. It's it's hard because of these processes, because of the market. It's already hard enough because of the market, like you said, the infrastructure, the add costs of virgin soil on a site that has just the old foundation and old framing just poured into the hole, and whatever covered with topsoil. Um, Connecting to old utilities, all this stuff is already hard. We really need to like incentivize people and say, we're going to make it so easy for you to build here, and you should want to buy like 20 lots and build all, your houses. We're doing a pre-approved plan initiative kind of thing, I think, in the future. So however we can, make it easier is kind of just, the big idea, I suppose.
It is a fun process. It is a
It
rewarding
should be
process. It's
fun.
like it's one of the most rewarding endeavors you can go on in your life to self-develop. And
Yeah,
you are so involved in that process. It's such an emotional thing. Like to hear you coming from a perspective of both an architect and a planner to like talk about like lowering the barriers and 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 forgive me for using this term, but are you in favor of deregulation to make
oh
house
boy.
building fun again?
Well, that's a good question too, because I think it does. It goes back to agency, and it goes back to ownership. And I
Hmm.
think when you're in a place like Cleveland where our housing stock is really old and the market has made it very difficult to own a house, so you're kind of left to rent, you don't really feel a sense of ownership naturally as a human. So like big picture, I think that was a great point. Building is fun. Like owning your house is fun. But bringing up something from nothing is fun. It is cool to see a street go from a vacant, swath of nothingness to this beautiful stretch of homes where you get to, you know, relish in the character and look at the details and say, wow, that's a cool, and I like that siding. I like those windows. And it like brings you some sort of connection to a community you might not have been connected to, or even like a yearning to be there. So there's something
Hmm.
kind of deeply poetic about it. And I think when we kind of put our heads down and say, well, you got to comply with this and this and this and whatever, like, and like all the different departments say that, we lose sight of how beautiful and how awesome this process really is. And we used to have that. I think that's the kind of beauty of American cities, of small town, like, small town USA, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Kent, Ohio, where I went to school. Like there's this beauty of a small main street and these little storefronts because it just connects to, people making it for themselves, starting businesses, living amongst the town, socializing, these third spaces, all these concepts that we always talk about. But I think like you said, we've really kind of gotten in our own way with trying to regulate that growth, and with, the built environment as it is today. Yeah, just really just making it easier and making it fun. I think that's a really good way of putting it. It should be a fun process, a rewarding process.
Okay, so now to play devil's advocate, because like we could talk to each other about this all day. Like
Right.
you're definitely an architect because I joke
Yeah.
that like one of the qualifications of being an architect, like it's the extra exam nobody tells you about, is you got to be able to talk for an hour about absolutely nothing
Oh yeah.
alone.
Use the word juxtaposition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Juxtaposition. Yep.
yeah. waxing
1000%.
poetics about our
Yeah,
favorite designers.
yeah,
Okay, okay, so zooming it back out here, I asked you a very specific question. I said, like, if I come to you with a building permit, how is this process different? And if you
right.
would have answered out the gate to make buildings more fun, I would have just started throwing tomatoes, right? Like that's not what people want to hear. You were prepared with
Sure.
a very direct answer. What you told me was, so where we left off was we've exposed the problem in the process
Mhm.
to the person that needs to address it. Now you've added your direct response to my question was you get support because of the people who are accountable are held accountable. And so now
Right,
you're not quarterbacking your own project. You feel supported by people handing you down the pipeline as you get closer to your end goal. And now,
right,
like, the city's there cheering you on as you cross the finish line because
right,
you are. Now we can step back and say, because we're trying to make building fun again, because it is a fun process. Like,
right,
all of the home builders who finished their house, and I do mean finished, because there's a lot of abandoned foundations around town right now on infill lots
right,
because this process is brutal in Detroit. It is actively hostile to the people who want to come here and build a house. We have
right,
forgotten how to do that. I'm not speaking for Cleveland, I'm speaking
right.
for my process in the city of Detroit. And so we're known locally as like we're the crazy people. We're the early adopters, if you will. You know, like we put our flag in the ground when things were rough and we persevered, but we had to get really creative in order to do that. And so you are changing that narrative by saying we also want to see you complete these interesting and unique homes. And here's how we're going to help you do that so that this process becomes fun again. All right. Well, now I really want to turn the conversation a bit more towards the construction of these homes because you touched on something where we're still doing it the old way. Boy, we sure are. I have a caricature of this that I joke on is like I've boiled it down to like we're still smacking sticks together with rocks to frame home. Like
Right,
since the invention of the water powered sawmill and the collated nail, we have built homes exactly the same, except for our nails have gotten worse. Well, our nails have gotten better, but the mass production has made
sure.
them now worse. Everything's gotten more expensive, and the wood we use is trash because we didn't manage our forests, and now we grow new growth way too quickly, and you can't find a straight 2x4.
Right,
So I know for a fact that you and I both are exploring these. I touched a little bit earlier on this conversation on shipping containers because that's often one of the first things that the internet loves to bring up about alternative
right.
construction. And boy, do I have experience in those. I've built over 40 container projects across the United States and internationally. They're fun, they're wacky, they're whimsical, right? But like, if you want to mess with containers, you better know the basics of architecture, or you're going to make a big mess. And a lot of
Right.
people have tried and failed, and there's some base understanding you got to know going into that. As with modular, as with panelized construction. So, first, from a city perspective, not just you, but your cohort, like how are you receiving on the city end alternative construction styles? And I guess what is important to you guys as you're looking at construction styles? Is it like the actual approvals and testing ratings? Is it just the sniff test? I want to know what these are. I want to see them. Like, what's important to you as you're looking at, hey, we're looking for the solution out of stick building. We all know, again, starting with the understanding on both sides, it's too expensive and it's not as good as it used to be. So if I say
Right,
we can't build it like we used to,
right.
what do we do now?
Great question. And I know I've actually been kind of more on the periphery personally with this. I think this is even maybe before my time. I know the city had here in Cleveland, they put out like an RFQ for modular builders and had some like demo sample homes or some test homes. And actually, I believe they're bringing in a modular builder that is relocating to Cleveland. And they've kind of worked out a deal with that, but um, tons of incentive, tons of interest in it. I think the city of Cleveland has really, as far as I can observe, really taken an interest in exploring these new models. There have been a handful of modular homes built in Cleveland. I know that there are more coming, and the state of Ohio, they have like and it's called the building code is specifies it as an industrialized unit. So the state board of building standards or whatever regulatory body reviews those modular plans will then basically approve them close that, send it to us, and once we see that, we see that it's been reviewed, based on the state building code, and we just basically look at any local ordinances or other, other things that we have to look at, our zoning codes and whatnot, and then it's kind of good to go. So from a city standpoint, tons of incentive. I think the bigger push, I would say, or the bigger kind of uphill battle, for lack of a better term, is just the market in terms of both, consumers and installers. I think the reason stick built homes prevail is because everyone knows how to do it for the most part. Everyone can price it out, and it's available everywhere. Like
Everybody's
modular home,
been doing it for the last,
right? Oh,
35 years of their
right,
career. Why
right.
change it up
My
now?
my dad taught me this, or my mentor taught me this, or
Unknown
whatever.
risks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the most like hum ho type of building because again, everyone knows how to do it. Even if the quality, and you're right, the quality has gone down, boards are skewed, all this other stuff. Um, but it's just the standard. It's the kind of standard of our day. So I'm
It's the
wondering like what's
universal standard, whether
right,
like we could unpack how we got there in this
right,
country and why the rest of the world kind of laughs at us when our houses burn
right,
down because like
right,
they heard the three little pigs and
right.
built masonry buildings everywhere else.
That's right.
We couldn't afford it and we had trees, right? So
Yep.
there's the quick version. And every big box store in our country supports this construction type. So it's not a scary new thing. You can trust that if something goes wrong, you can go to Home Depot
Correct.
or Lowe's and
Exactly.
likely fix it or manage yourself.
And it's forgiving too. I think that's the,
Yeah, that's
as
the
an
word.
architect, right. And as an architect, it's my thing is, especially here in
Comfortable,
Cle
safe, forgiving, risk-free.
well, not
Yeah.
only that, but yeah, absolutely that. But in addition to that, in Cleveland, when you have old wonky homes and a wall that's bowing out and something that's not square, and you try to, how do you rehab that? How do you put an addition on that? How do you reframe that? Like wood framed homes and buildings give you that opportunity to almost sculpt rather than, um, you know, plugging something in has to work perfectly with like minimal tolerances. Just big picture. So, but I that's kind of the crux of my what keeps me up at night is like,
Mm.
where do we go from here? Absolutely. What do we build
Yeah.
with next?
What do we build with that? So
Yeah,
as a city, you guys are open as long as as
absolutely.
long as
Yeah,
it's meeting those requirements and you can apply it to like a code. Like we can follow like, hey, this is how this building stands up. This is why it is protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the
right,
users and the occupants.
right.
And from my perspective, like I mean, an architect who's gun shy around fire conversations, go figure.
Yep,
But like
that's
that's
a big
always
one.
been like there's no question you follow from like the war on stairs that's starting in Chicago right now all the way
Yes,
to the civil conversations that we're having, the discourse among users and occupants, like more stairs, more hallways didn't save lives. You know what saved lives?
right,
Sprinklers save lives in residential construction. And now we're coming to terms with that. Like, hey, the technology of these systems advanced faster than the building materials. So we can actually solve this problem differently, and everybody's agreeing with that. So these are some of the biggest changes that have occurred in my career as an architect, specifically to housing, and that happens to be the category of architecture that I focus on the most. That Three Squared has focused on the most because of our location, because of the work that we do here in Detroit and Ohio and the Midwest. It's everybody's kind of learning these lessons together, and I would
right.
say from an outsider's perspective, Cleveland is kudos to you guys. You guys are very forward thinking. A lot of things are happening. I know people who have done SIP panels there. I know
Right.
people who have done foam buildings, steel reinforced foam buildings over there. I know the masonry has made a splash. So on top of like just we say alternative construction, that's also like the whole building science of things from the outside to the inside. Like there's also
Right.
like the small versions of this that come across your desk every day where it's like a new siding product or a new ventilation application
Right.
that, oh, like we didn't see that. And then you tie those into the mechanical systems. Oh, here we are, full circle, admitting that this is a very complicated puzzle involving a lot of moving pieces.
Yes. Yep. It's an
And
assembly. It's not, just like we say about walls and floors and roofs, it's an assembly is the term that architects use. It's an assembly of
assembly.
details. And I think it's the same way in permitting. It's the same way in the project team. It's all this like layering. And I think, once we start it's easy to look at a building or house and say, that's the object, that's the thing, that I'm looking at. But when you kind of break it apart and you look at the details in the drawings and you look at the details of the actual assemblies, like I said, and you look at the details of the lists of the contractors and their, teams that put these things together, and the dozens of people at the city that help to push it through, you're right. That is essentially, it's a layer of people, of things, of assemblies. So
So
yeah,
I'm looking for the term, and I'll tell you where I'm at on it, but I'm looking for the term that encapsulates this whole process, that is inclusive of the vanguard of pre-construction and tax understanding all the way to appraisal and long-term occupancy. Like, what are we talking about? I believe it's not designing buildings. It's not developing infill. It's like we are talking about the building delivery system from start
right,
to finish. And I think that's inclusive of like how much can we build off the site and deliver it to a job site while everyone still feels comfortable with their approval part of the process, right? Modular's going to play a big role in the conversation moving forward. Housing coming out of factories in part or in whole. It's a big part of this conversation. I think this is all inclusive though, and it can't be isolated just to this factory. Like it's one piece of like the things that happen under that ground on the site are
right.
just as complicated and sometimes just as expensive as the building that sits on top of it, you know?
Yeah, and I will
So,
say, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, well, just that's where I leave off is like the coining term that I'm searching for is that maybe it's building delivery system, maybe it's not, but like that, you get what I'm trying to
I
grasp
do,
at.
and I think what I always turn to again as an architect and just someone interested in building typologies is precedents, as you as a professor would tell your students, like what are the precedent studies. And for me, it goes back to typologies. Like let's take my fascination, I know this is a goofy fascination, but like big box stores and the
Hmm.
advent of that is like, that was something that was coined, Midwest, Detroit, Cleveland, anywhere in Ohio or Michigan is like the quintessential space for it. We have sprawling land, we have flat land off of highways, we can build. And so like there was a problem and then someone executed, like I think a genius but silly, like stupidly silly solution in a way, where there were, multiple shops and little mom and pop shops around a city, and it was hard with the advent of the car, which I don't love, of course, as an architect, to get around to all these shops, and you have to drive to your pharmacy and then your grocery store and then your supermarket, whatever, to get all your stuff. And all that stuff would come from different warehouses and from different manufacturers. So it's the same layering system. And someone, one day, I believe it was Sears, kind of had this idea of like, okay, people are driving in cars now, which again, crappy history there, but regardless, everyone's driving in cars. We have all these like different warehouses that people go to these different stores for. Can we just like make a system where everything is both at the same time in a warehouse and a store? And then that was like that
Mm-hmm.
bombshell moment where we basically just
Mm-hmm.
like completely layered all these things together and like everything was nestled together. And like I want to my point of that backstory is like how can we replicate that with housing and I guess solving the housing affordability crisis is instead of looking at these elements in a vacuum, well, I got to get the land and I got to get the materials and got to assemble my team and get the permits, and it's like I go back to the term quarterbacking the project. How do we just streamline it so it's like this all people will always find it, the masses will find it easier for an all-inclusive option. That's why everyone, myself included, love Costco, love whatever, whatever. Like, yes, you go to the
Yeah.
little mom and pop stores for the experience, but like when push comes to shove, if you need stuff, you go there, or you go to Walmart or Target or whatever's available to you. I'm not necessarily advocating for like standardizing things, but like I guess just that mindset. How do we see this array, this like massive table full of issues, and consolidate them into one thing? Whether it's assembling, what in my mind, it's like, can we do a land bank lot and a pre-approved plan and also connect the builder, have a short list of builders here at the city that we've pre-vetted and say you want to build
Who have
here?
worked with banks who are willing to
Right.
pre-approve based on those
Sign
rules, who
sign
can
on the
look
dotted
at the
line.
energy use of the life cycle of the building and
Right.
maybe potentially wrap that into the financing conversation. Yes.
Right now
The
it's on the builder to do
layers.
that. Correct.
The
Correct.
layer that's that yeah, we're on to something. And on the big box thing, like I smell a future podcast episode. So as we wrap up the conversation today, Zach, this has been absolutely
It's
phenomenal,
an
and I'm
awesome. Thank
so
you.
excited. All the topics that we've touched on here, something that's come back up from your perspective has been your look at the market, which I will admit is refreshing. So explain to me more about your thought process as you're coming to the table from both sides of the fence. You keep mentioning the market. Explain to me your thought process, what that means. Leave our audience with some like some
Yeah,
hanging thoughts here.
yeah. Well, for better or for worse, and everyone has their criticisms of the political systems and the way that this works. That's how things get built. Things have to pencil financially. And in architecture school,
Mhm.
we would throw around ideas of we could do
Projects
this
move
and
as
we could do
fast
that.
as money moves.
Right. And it's like not only is it like the design that you have, but it's like, we would design stuff in school in an area where it just like none of it made any sense like financially. It's like this could never
You're
occur. Not
talking like
only
in architecture or school, like
yeah,
design
yeah, like we would
studios, like
right. And it
you're
was
throwing off
wonderful.
the wall stuff that we know because we were designing without a budget, right? There were the
Yes,
real world layers weren't there. We were only looking at one little
right.
stack in that big complicated book.
Correct, but not only on like we're gonna put a massive porcelain wall and whatever crazy thing. Not only from like a design or aesthetic standpoint, but just like the projects themselves. And it was, don't get me wrong, wonderful design exercises, very necessary for students learning the process. But I guess what I would like leave you with is that's how things get built. Things have to make sense to everyone involved, for the architect preparing the plans, for the developer doing it. That you'd be surprised at how many things fall through because you know
That didn't make
it's
sense.
right. They didn't make sense, but also we have to keep in mind we can't let this become a race to the bottom. I think that is like an unfortunate truth of, yeah, I guess you want to call it capitalism or the current kind of like late stage capitalism. People that there is like this kind of race to the bottom. Um, like just look at the example of studs. It's like who can make studs, who can fabricate or generate wood from a mill as quickly and as cheaply as possible, and it's like everyone's kind of competing their way down. So it's something I always grapple with too. It's like how do we combine all these things and look at all, like you said, these layers, but also develop projects that will work basically because we can generate as many cool renderings and as many awesome site plans that we've had dozens of on our north coast of Lake Erie, tons of awesome site plans with hotels and pools and public parks and beaches on the lake right in front of downtown. It looks awesome.
Hmm.
But Mike, even with the Brown Stadium being, this is another contested conversation that off the record, like not affiliated with the city, just my own personal thoughts. You know, that's a big conversation. But the reason that we keep recycling through these plans, in my opinion, is that like is the market is like what is the market? What is the demand? Where is the population to support these awesome looking facilities? How are we going to build 10, 13-story, apartment buildings on the North Coast if we don't have the population to support? Like what is going to fill these places? Who's going to perform the upkeep? Who's going to support the small businesses moving in and the taco stand and the restaurant and the steakhouse that we're proposing there? How is this all going to work? So that's just like the kind of network of the market that's in my mind. I'm always trying to assess more beyond, oh, this would be cool here, because that's like the classic, very just like you say, bringing back the shipping containers. It's very
Yeah.
easy. Here's a enclosure that's available, let's do it. Like that's the A to B to C thought process that people have. Like this will solve the housing crisis. Like we have these things that we can just plop on a site and live in. Well, no, maybe, but like you said, you really have to architect your way around it and reinforce it and insulate it and all this other stuff. And really, and at that point, you're picking it apart where you're like, why didn't I just go back to the conversation of stick framing? So same thing with the market is like, how do we actually go beyond just this would be cool here, or the disgruntled Facebook comment of we need more of this, or we need another park here, or we need more shopping centers here, or whatever but how do we actually make it work and develop a model and a pro forma that like will work? And that's, I guess, what I try to connect with some of my architect colleagues is, will this work? Is this pencil? Does it hold water? So that's kind of what's always floating around my mind in terms of the market, I
Yeah.
would say.
Well, one of
Yeah.
our core values at Three Squared is design what works.
Yeah,
That
there you
that
go.
hol-
No,
that holds a
absolutely.
lot of meaning, as you just
Yeah.
unpacked. Zach, in our short time that I've gotten to know you, I can attest you're good people, man. I really appreciate the mindset that you're coming to on this,
Thank you.
because it's big picture, but you're bringing a realist perspective to a conversation filled with pessimists and optimists. What I heard you say was like, I hear it all the time from my client side of the fence, which is like, if we build it, they will come. Horrible mindset. And cities have learned better over the years. And you're
Right.
not saying like, I'm saying this is a bad idea or I'm a naysayer.
No,
You're saying like, hey, you should fact check this because I want this to be supported, but this only works if people are living here and using it the way
correct.
the renderings say. And like, have we fact checked this? And I just, man, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I'm really excited to open up this conversation. I mean, today we've covered everything from carefully dancing with the word, big scary word, deregulation,
Yeah,
to talking about exposing the issues, providing a pathway of support and accountability that really gives some agency and ownership back to people who are self-developing their like forever homes, their dreams, and making this whole process fun again. So we will absolutely return to the table again soon in future conversations. But Zach Miller, everybody, thank you for joining us today.
yeah. Thank you so much, Brecken. I really look forward to continuing the conversation. Sorry if I talked your ear off, but I really get like, as you can tell, I get hyped up about these things. So I
It's
appreciate you giving me some time
This
to
was
express
perfect.
my ideas.
Sometimes we have three hosts, sometimes we have two hosts, sometimes we have one host, but it's all contingent on the conversations we expect. And two architects in a room, that's a lot of personality, as we
Yeah,
know. It's been a lot of fun. But good collaborators. I mean, I think people with your personality type and your communication style are uniquely suited to be on both sides of the fence because you really are bringing a lot to the table. And what can I say? Cleveland is lucky to have you on their team.
thank you, Breck. I really appreciate that.
This
Thank
has
you so much.
been Innovative Real Estate with 3 Squared Inc., and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.